네, 안녕하십니까. 다시 한번 인사드리겠습니다. 2021 글로벌 ESG
Yes, welcome back to the session. We now move into deep inside. We've talked about this session. We'll be talking about legal issues and accounting issues related to ESG. So with no further ado, we'd like to invite Woo Tae-hee, the Executive Vice Chairman of the Korea Chamber of Commerce and Industry, to talk to us about the ESG expansion plan for mid and large-sized corporations in Korea. Yes, good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me at this session. I really enjoyed listening to the presentations of other presenters. I'm also glad that I'll be able to provide a slightly different perspective of ESG, coming from the more small and medium enterprise-centered point of view. So I believe the previous presentations mostly focused on large conglomerates. Now let's shift to SMEs. So just a brief history of ESG Timeline. It first came out in 2005 from IFC. The report titled "Who Cares Wins" came out, and that's where the ESG term was first introduced. And in 2006, the 6 principles of responsible investment was introduced by the UN. And most recently, Chairman Larry Pink from BlackRock, which was mentioned several times in the presentations earlier, sent out a letter talking about the ESG initiatives. Because of COVID-19, people have really come to understand why it is important to save Earth and work on preventing climate catastrophes. I'm sure you all saw the video clips of New York subways being, inundated with torrential rainpour. So climate change, climate catastrophe is really at our doorstep, and naturally people are paying more attention to ESG. President Moon Jae-in of Korea in March of 2021 participated in the KCCI Day of Korean Commerce and Industry and introduced that this is going to be the first year that Korea introduces the ESG management. When it comes to the small and medium enterprises, we have a slightly different story. Like some people say that SMEs that do exports need to introduce ESG because they work with the European buyers who are very heavy on ESG. There are also some people who say that ESG is for SMEs in terms of getting more investments. However, I'd like to emphasize that ESG is basically an activity with the goal of promoting or enhancing the value of a business. So whether you are exporting, whether you're working with your partners in Europe, it doesn't really matter. If you want to enhance the value of your company, then you have to do ESG. ESG is important because the market demands it. BlackRock and other investors are just bluntly saying that they're going to pull their investments out if you don't do ESG. So they're becoming very aggressive towards companies that are not doing ESG. Secondly, large conglomerates, big businesses, they are bringing in ESG. Netherlands in the 2019, Germany this year, France a couple of years ago, along with the EU Commission, they're all legalizing or introducing various acts and regulations to incorporate ESG into their business activities. So if you are related to child labor, if you are harming the environment, if you're doing no good to the society, basically you're going to be ruled out. Privacy is also an important issue. Carbon border tax is another issue. We already have a draft. It's going to be implemented from 2023. Steel, aluminum, fertilizers, cements, and electricity are going to be impacted. And when it comes into full effect in 2025, petrochemical is also going to be affected. So even if POSCO is the most cost-effective, good quality company in the world, if they, for example, do not do ESG, they're going to be penalized. So this is going to be a nationwide issue, not just something to be left into the hands of individual businesses. It's a nationwide, country-level issue. And thirdly, the consumers, they're changing. We did a survey in May at KCCI, and 63% of those surveyed said that they will be looking into the ESG elements of a company when they make a purchasing decision. More people said if the company is not doing ESG, then they will not buy from that company. Surprisingly, 88% of the consumers said if a company is good at ESG, they will buy the products or services from that company, even if it is more expensive. So that's the reality. That is the reality. And that is why I say SMEs will also need an ESG strategy, maybe somewhat different from the large conglomerates, but they will definitely need it. Large conglomerates have already started introducing ESG. They're doing promotional activities, they're doing marketing, explaining their ESG activities. SMEs, on the other hand, have limited resources, so they are up against a very difficult challenge. That is why I think the SMEs need to be more strategic. They need to really be clear about where their target is. It doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be direct. Even if you don't hit the bullseye, I think the SMEs need to, start shooting for the ESG goal. TCFD is the hottest topic in ESG sector at the large conglomerate level. So this is going to come into effect, talking about 4 areas: governance, strategy, risk management, and indices and goals. So because this is so big, its sister came out, TNFD. This adds in climate change and biodiversity into the existing TCFD discussions. It has launched in June of 2021, this year, and its framework will be provided in 2023. We also have green taxonomy coming from the EU. So if it's an industry that harms the climate, harms the environment, they're going to rule those companies and players out. And on the horizon, we also have social taxonomy. It's not concrete yet, but basically it's the same thing as green taxonomy, only looking into social issues like human rights, child labor, privacy issues, and so forth. So we have different institutions coming up with very specific regulations and recommendations. Companies like BASF, SK, those large companies have formed a value balancing alliance. And the SASB or SASB is working with the IIRC, and they will be also setting up a value reporting foundation. So with all of these activities going on, how are the SMEs doing? Half of the SMEs are aware of it. They feel that it is needed, but 74% say that they're not ready for it. 92% say they have never been evaluated with ESG criteria, and 76% of the SMEs surveyed say they have no specific organization that deal with ESG issues within their company. So why is it so difficult for SMEs to do ESG? Number one is because they don't have a separation of ownership versus business management. Because they don't have a board of directors, they don't have a body that can regulate their activities. And secondly, most SMEs have very tight cash flow, so they are prone to make short-term decisions. And if the top management, which is also in many cases the owner of the business, do not voluntarily want to do ESG, then there's always an obstacle. And because SMEs are relatively small and they have overlapping role R&R, the activities that they do are in many cases are not officially stated. So putting all this together, it turns out that the difficulties faced by SMEs in terms of doing ESG, number one is they don't have the money. Number two, they don't have the necessary resources. Number three, they don't have specific guidelines. And then they don't know whether if it's really necessary, it's too complicated, there are too diverse evaluation criteria, no incentives, and so forth. However, SMEs must study ESG. First of all, they need to really hit the books and learn the ESG-related laws. A total of around 130 acts and regulations deal with ESG issues. So you really need to go through them one by one, and if you see anything that you're doing wrong in terms of the environment, social, and governance-related areas, you need to do your homework and you need to get your act straight. There are about 600 different criteria that is applied when doing ESG. Now, that's a lot. So the SMEs asked the KPMG to pull out some of the most essential areas where these SMEs really need to work on. There's EcoVadis and the RBA, Responsible Business Alliance. These are the key or the most prominent rules or standards that is being adopted by many partner companies of large conglomerates. So KPMG looked at these evaluation standards and they came up with 14 ESG management indexes for SMEs. So 14 is really not small. So we graded them, put them on a matrix, looking at the issue, the two criteria of urgentness and manageability. So you see on this matrix, the grid, what are the things that are urgent and that can be adopted relatively easily. So the items marked as urgent and manageable, you can adopt. One of the key areas is HR-related, social-related elements. So make sure that your employees can go on vacation at a proper time, make sure you pay them properly, make sure you basically feed them and treat them properly. So these are the first things that SMEs can do to make that one step progress towards being better at EGS. So who can you turn to get assistance or get help? Well, there are large conglomerates that SMEs are working with. Turn to them, reach out to them, and get their involvement, get their help. Apple is doing it with their partners. VASP is doing it with their suppliers. Henkel and Solvay is also working together, and they have formed TFS, Together for Sustainability. It's a chemical industry initiative where these large conglomerates, large companies work with their partners for the SME ESG improvement. In Korea, you have SK hynix forming eco-alliances. They're providing expert consulting and training for the ESGs. So reach out to them, get the large framework from them, see which areas your business is lacking, and that's the first things. Those will be the first things you can start doing. Last month, the Korean government announced its policies for promoting further ESG in the SMEs. The government has introduced numerous regulations to control ESG issues. We voiced our concern because those regulations, if like investors or hedge funds like BlackRock doesn't respond, it's going to be meaningless. So we voiced our concerns, and the government has made a shift from focusing on regulations to providing more assistance. So that's where the government position stands right now. At the National Assembly, we have 115 different laws and regulations that need to be discussed and passed by the National Assembly. So we really need to minimize regulations. What the SMEs need the most is to provide more sustainability-linked loans, or SLLs in short. We need more financial institutions to provide these SLLs to the SMEs. To promote this, to promote further support for SMEs, the KCCI will continue to publish guidelines and handbooks, create educational YouTube videos, so that the SMEs can use as learning materials for ESG. We'll also work with the government to make sure that ESG implemented on SMEs will be less regulation and more support, and will continue to be the channel to convey the voice of the field to the market. Thank you very much for that presentation. It's great to hear that the KCCI is really backing the SMEs in terms of adopting or implementing the SEGs. Could you share us any examples of the large conglomerates collaboration with SMEs? A good example that I can think of is the Shinhan Bank, which runs a fund for promoting ESG for SMEs. LG is also a good example. They're providing lots of training material, lots of training sessions for their partners. So again, I say reach out to your partners at the large conglomerates for help. Thank you.